Welcome, everyone, to another episode of In the Driver's Seat, the podcast that's all about exploring how to improve the value of your business with our mission of helping business owners positioning themselves and their business for successful exit. My name is Simon Zryd. Together with Steven Kohnke, we co-host this podcast. We're both partners at Denver Business Coach, certified exit planning advisors, certified value builders, and we've worked in this field of value building and exit planning for almost a decade now. Our podcast aims to make the discussions of building a valuable, sellable business more accessible to business owners. And we really try, our mission is to bring this conversation in as early as possible, not just in the last few years before a business owner is looking to exit. We started this podcast beginning of 2024. There were two statistics that really inspired us to launch this podcast. Steven, welcome. I'd like to introduce you, or I'd like to have you introduce those statistics.
Yeah. So our whole mission behind this, right, is driven by these two stats, as you mentioned, and they're really around the battle business owners have to go through towards the end of their business. It's 3 out of 4 businesses that go to market do not sell. And anywhere between 70 to 90% of a business owner's wealth is tied up in that business. So business owners today are putting a ton of their wealth at risk by not growing their business with enterprise value in mind, leaving a lot on the table that really puts them in a bad position towards the end of that business. So we're doing this podcast, and it's what drives us to prepare business owners as early as possible.
Yeah. And today we're super excited to have a very special guest with us. Our topic is personal readiness to exit. And who better to have join us than Annie, one of our coaches here at Denver Business Coach, Annie Growth. I'd like to introduce you a little bit for our listeners. Her resume is probably too long and impressive to go through in every bullet point, but you can check it out on our website. But just a few highlights. Annie, you have a master's degree in business. You've been a restaurant franchise owner. I think you've opened 17 Quiznos location. You've run those and then successfully exited that business. You've been in the financial service industry as well for 24 years. And then obviously you're an excellent coach with lots of degrees and certifications. And we're super proud to have you as part of our team and are looking forward to this conversation today. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. And like I introduced the conversation, Steven and I had many podcasts and conversations around, is the business ready for an exit? We talked about systems, we talked about processes, financials, concentration on the employee side, on the customer side. So we've really explored what makes a business sellable from many different angles at this point. But the conversation that we really haven't dove into as much is the business owner ready for an exit, and the dynamics that are at play when it comes to that conversation for a business owner. And I think value builder, and Steven, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's statistics out there that basically say 75% of business owners regret their exit, within a year or a couple of years after exit. And a lot of this has to do because they didn't do enough on the planning on the personal side. And we know that for any major change, there's usually some push factors and some pull factors. Like push is you want to get away from certain things. Maybe you're burned out. Maybe you're just ready to move on to something else. And then pull is like what's in the future? Like what are you moving towards? And I find that that's probably a good framework to start thinking about for business owners. Annie, so I'd like to, have you share a little bit. You've gone through this journey and you've had your businesses, and then at some point it came time for you to exit. What were the conversations that were going on in your mind? When did you know you were ready to make that change and leave your, sell your business, leave it behind?
Well, a lot of my experience may be different than individual owners because I was part of a franchise. So it may be a little different. I watched the numbers and what was going on within the system. And it's like, you need to sell this while the selling is good and to make sure that it's profitable. And so I really kept an eye on what was going on with the franchisor and how the growth was working with the company within itself. And once I realized and made that choice to it's time to go, I wanted to make sure that I had a buyer in the wings, if you will. And I was fortunate enough that that happened. And I will tell you, the biggest mistake I made is I didn't have somebody like Denver business coach in my back pocket, because I accepted a price that was beneath what I should have. So when I got out, I decided I would take a couple of years and travel and play golf and just have fun, because I, worked from 6 a.m. to midnight for years, literally. And I was in a golf tournament in Denver, as a matter of fact, and the woman I was playing with was a financial advisor. And I told her, I need something else to do. I'm only 43 years old and people my age can't come out and play. And she was a financial advisor. So that started the next part of my journey, which now, as I've, gone through and been, in financial services and coaching, one of my favorite things to tell business owners is you need to figure out what you need to retire to, not just from.
I love that as a framework. Like, this is really what's next in that conversation.
Right.
Because I would say, from conversations that Stephen and I had with business brokers, right? Like, it's rare. We've heard the statistics at the beginning. It's rare for a business to successfully sell. And a lot of the times what business broker would actually tell us, it's not just the deal structure that the business is not sellable or valuable, but it's often whatever is going on in the mind or in the head of the business owner that gets cold feet when it truly comes to an exit, for a variety of reasons. So you mentioned, Annie, that you made the choice that it's time to sell, and you had basically looked at financials
Right.
of the business, that this is the best time to exit at
Yes.
this point. And then beyond that, were there other considerations for you?
Well, the biggest part of it was, there was partially burnout, because in the restaurant business, I mean, you literally,
Yeah.
I felt like my success was dependent upon me being able to touch things on a daily basis. Even though I had good management, I just still wanted to be a part of it. The biggest part of why I wanted to exit, aside from I knew it was the right time, is that I was tired and I wanted to change, and I didn't know what that change would look like. And so if I had to do it all over again, I would have done it differently. But I'm fortunate that, all turned out well. And a lot of business owners aren't, because our heads take over and we get crazy up there. It just gets crazy.
Yeah. I mean, one of the conversations that I've been in with business owners that were close to an exit, that were probably more in the ballpark of maybe like not burned out by definition, but they were definitely tired.
Right.
And maybe they were at that point where to take the business truly to the next level would have taken more capital, would have taken more energy, building a team, all of that. And they were just like not maybe wanting to do that at that stage in life that they were at. But then a buyer comes in, or a potential buyer comes in, and they're all excited about the business. And they're like, oh my God, there's so much potential here. And we can do this. And all of a sudden, my client got like cold feet, because they could see all the unrealized potential that the business had, that they hadn't really been able to execute on. And it was a tension to be in, to say, okay, I'm walking away from what could have been as well. So maybe even outside of your personal experience, Annie, like what are some questions, some exercises, some thinking that a business owner can do that really helps avoid that feeling of regret or being like pulled back into the business, when really what is right is to sell and exit and move on to something new?
Well, I will tell you, initially when I started the process, one of the choices that I made, and I still look back at it and wonder, was that the right choice? I had a group come in that wanted to buy, and the principal was late for our meeting. And I told him, I said, you can't have this business. I've spent my life building this, and I'm not going to sell it to you. And, who knows how it would have turned out if I would have sold it to that group. But I think make sure the number one thing you need to make sure of is, what do you want?
Mhm.
What's the number one thing that you want? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the bottom line. Do you want your health? Do you want a different career? Do you want to make sure that you're ready financially for the next step? Do you want to make sure that you're physically and emotionally? Because it's a big emotional toll that it takes on business owners when we sell our businesses, because it's another part of who you are. And for most of us, when we sell our businesses, it's a really big part of who
Yeah.
we are. So I think it's really important to really understand on all of those levels, emotionally, financially, physically, are you ready to move on to what's next in your life?
Mm-hmm.
There's one question that we'll sometimes ask business owners of that identity question of, what do you consider yourself to be, or who do you consider yourself to be? It's, when you describe yourself to someone, is it, I am a business owner, or I own a business? I think that there's very small changes in that, how that sentence is phrased, but it's a big identity distinction of identifying as being a business owner, and that is your identity, versus you are someone who just owns a business. And that's important from the psychological perspective and the emotional toll that you're talking about. For us, when we're building that exit plan and that strategy to make them happier, not make them, but help them be happier with their exit, it's helping them potentially reshape their identity of being someone. If they do consider themselves just to be a business owner and they no longer own a business, that's an identity crisis.
Right.
And
Well,
then that's one of those success factors that we're talking about.
absolutely. Well, and it's like Ken Blanchard told all of us that read the 1 Minute Manager.
Oh, yeah.
And so many times we work in rather than on.
Mm-hmm.
And if we work in it, we have tunnel vision. We don't see all the exterior that can help and or hurt us. So it's really important to take a step back and make sure that you take some time, if you're allow yourself to work on your business rather than in it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always have to be time to make the donuts.
One of the lines from EPI Exit Planning Institute is, everyone's heard of work on versus in your business, but what about working on versus in your life, your personal life too? And I think that's an interesting perspective of being able to say, when it comes to exits, especially, of what are you working on instead of just doing life? How are you working on your life as well? And what does the business play into that? What is next? What are you going to buy another business? And really having a written down plan, I've found, is helpful for business owners understanding, or getting excited rather, to exit. Because Simon, as you were talking about, a lot of brokers that we mentioned, or that we talked to rather, say a big reason why deals don't go through is seller's cold feet, is they're not sure what they're going to do. So if we can help them get excited about the next phase of their life, I know retirement is a dirty word in entrepreneurship most of the time, is really understanding what are you going to be doing after you sell your business and getting excited about that. The thing I always say is, drinking margaritas on a beach only gets you so far, and then you don't know what else to do, and got to have that plan written down.
Well, and I think that the distinction of language is so important. And what if we changed it from retirement to rewirement? We rewire how we think, how we move about in our day-to-day business, in our life. And I mean those two separately and together, our business and our life. So we need to do some rewirement.
I like that.
Yeah. One question I have for you is, or again, from experience and conversations we've had with business owners, I think we have clients that work with us that are very clear. I want to start this business. I want to build it for 5 years and I want to exit and do that over and over. And then we have clients that have owned their business for 20 plus years, and it truly is such a big part of their identity, and they might be financially ready to move on, and they're, might be ready to retire from business ownership at least, but rewire and move on to something else. But what they care about is also legacy, like what is happening with the business after a sale. And is the team taken care of? Will the customers be taken care of? Will the brand that was built, will it continue? I would imagine in a franchise, it's a little different and a little less personal, but I'm sure even for you, there were some considerations around who are you leaving behind as you're moving on, and what impact would a sale have on you? And maybe there's some things you want to share from your personal experience, or even just from clients that you've worked with over the years. How do you tackle that conversation, and how do you prepare yourself for the impact that your decision will have ultimately on so many people's lives?
I think one of the biggest things that's important from a coach's perspective initially when we begin the conversation is, what are you expecting to happen? Because so many people don't understand that, and if they're not asked the right questions, they're going to go down what their dad did, what their best friend did, what their mom told them to do, whomever it is in their circle. And so one of the biggest questions we can ask people is, what are you expecting that's going to happen? Not only with your staff, but with yourself and your family. And how do you want to leave a legacy? I will tell you, one of the things that I tell my clients all the time, your kids don't care about your business, they care about money. And so it's really important to make that distinction. Do your kids care about your business? Do they care if it survives? So begin to have those conversations and open the door, the floodgates, if you will. Ask your employees, what are they going to do when you leave? Because who knows, the new owners may cut staff because they've got a loan to pay back, or they don't do customer service the same way you do. So there's just a lot. If something were to happen, what are you going to do? And I think that's really an important question to not only ask of yourself. And, I worked with a guy once who was super wealthy, and when he got ready to sell his business, his wife told me on the down low, I don't want him home every day. She's like, what am I going to do? So I think it's really important. It really should be a joint decision on so many levels, just to your point, rather than I'm going to do this. Because you're right. There are too many people involved. So it's about asking the right questions of others and of yourself. And I also think, Simon, one of the biggest things for business owners is fear. And as you both know, you've heard me say this before, the acronym is fear is false evidence appearing real. And I think that it's important when people begin to feel that fear, is it true? And if it is true, or if it isn't true, how do you explain it? How do you prove it? How do you disprove it? So it's really important that fear is one of the things that stops most of us from most of the things we want to do in our lives. So that's a big exploration, especially when you're getting ready to buy and or sell a business.
It's a big decision.
It is. We had a grand opening the night before we opened our first Quiznos, and it was a VIP party. I got home about midnight and I sat on the edge of and had to be back at 6 o'clock the next morning. And I sat on the edge of my bed at midnight, crocodile tears. What have I done? Fortunately it turned out okay, but it's just the emotion, the roller coaster, and that happens during, before, and after.
Is there, one of the personal readiness, questions is, let's pretend someone is going to not replace their income stream from a business to a new income stream, but they're really looking to slow down and kind of have the sale of the business close what we call the wealth gap, to then have enough finances to live without having to trade time for money anymore. At least it's defined like that. So, through your lens as a financial advisor, what conversations do you have, or what conversations do you wish you would have sooner with business owners as they're thinking about exiting, and what considerations are there through that particular lens?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that business owners they take care of everybody but themselves, and they need to make sure that they're saving money as well, because they'll set things up for their employees, but they don't set things up, not all business owners, obviously, but to make sure that you're doing the things that you've learned, or maybe that you did when you were an employee rather than the employer, is to not stop those things. Because I'm sure that you both know that a true financial exponential curve is 30 years. You have the accumulation phase, you have the growth phase, and then you have the takeoff phase, and you can't shortcut that. Well, I suppose if you sold your business for tens of millions, you could, but most people, when they're small business owners selling for between $4 and $8 million, what's it really going to take for you to live the remainder of your life, whether it's traveling that you want to do, children that have got to go to school, that you want to go to college, weddings, all of those kinds of things. And those are the kinds of conversations that people need to be having with professionals, and not just at the kitchen table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that I notice with business owners who work with financial advisors is, like, I don't want to say that, the financial advisor often is not really taking into account the true valuation of the business, or the potential for that business to actually not sell, right? So we do have that reality of most small businesses that go to market ultimately don't sell. And to your point, a lot of business owners invest a lot of the extra money that they could be stacking away right back into the business under the disguise of building a valuable business that eventually is going to take care of retirement. And so I think as it comes to being a business owner, I guess, or as it comes to closer to retirement, is there more honest conversations that business owners need to have? Is there something else that we need to zoom in on that you see is missing from the conversation?
Well, certainly a full financial query is in order, like, how much do you spend in your expenses each year? What's your true net worth without your business and without your home, if your home isn't paid for? People, a lot of times I find, don't really understand what their true net worth is and what it costs them to live for 365 days a year. And that's without doing anything special or anything extra, or without a $30,000 wedding. So people really need to come to the nuts and bolts of, what does it cost me to live 365 days?
Yeah.
What do you have to do? I mean, I think the number is something like $10.27 a day for you to blow through $10,000 a year. So, and people, when I was a kid, I learned in my early 20s, I learned about being a dollar dropper. Oh, it's only $1. And then as my income grew, oh, it's only $10. And then as my income really grew, oh, it's only $1,000. You know, and that's what happens is people become dollar droppers. It doesn't matter how many dollars, but we really need to mind those dollars.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good advice. You know, one area that we haven't zoomed in on, and if you have any thoughts on that, it ties a little bit into the future vision, but when it comes to an exit, you know, there's lots of options, right? It's not just, okay, sell, here's the money and I'm leaving, but depending on what stage you're at, you can stay on, you can bring in an investor, you can bring in a silent partner, you can stay on as a consultant, you can stay on the board. Like there's so many options to structure a deal also, sometimes in terms of personal vision and what you want to do, but sometimes also to mitigate risk that a potential buyer sees when they're buying into the company. Is there, just from your experience over the years, what have you seen when it comes to those kind of considerations? Is there, what questions is it worth, how do I say that? What questions should one ask when thinking about that?
One of the first questions to ask of yourself is, will I regret this? You know, and if the answer is no, then the follow-up question to that is, how do you know? And if the answer to that is yes, what are the questions you need to ask yourself as why you are saying yes to that? Regret is one of the biggest things that will keep us from living our lives fully. So regret is a big question to answer before you do something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just thinking about how I was working on an estate plan at one point, and technically the process would only take like two weeks to fill out the paperwork and everything. But what I realized is, as those questions would, you know, come up about what would happen with my daughter when something would happen to the parents, and it took some time to sit with those questions and to have like in-depth conversation, rather than just, how do I feel about it today? Answer that question, check, let's move on to the next thing. And to your point, I think like staying with that conversation for a period of time and ask the right question, go deeper with it, have conversations, rather than our mind who just wants to move on, check it off the list because there's 10,000 other things to do when it comes to exit planning. Anyway, it just reminded me, like, really slowing down to be as confident as one can be to avoid that.
Well, it's also important, you know, a lot of people will have a financial advisor, but do they have a financial coach? And a coach typically will take the time to ask the right questions rather than to tell you what you need to do. Need to be asking the right questions.
I love that distinction.
Well, you think about the financial services industry, we're all bound by a fiduciary responsibility to do what's best for the client. And you and I and Stephen know that doesn't always happen. So again, it's about making sure, do you have the right person in place? Do you have the right exit plan? Do you have the right team, like Denver Business Coach, in your corner? And do you have the right financial person in your corner that really can walk that walk with you?
Yeah. Because it's not just, I mean, the math is important to work out, but the emotion and the human element in all of that, just as much, even sometimes more.
Well, there was a scientist years ago, the book and The Power of the Heart. And what they proved in their studies is that the heart really guides the brain. And many people think it's the brain guides the heart. It's not true. And if you're not squared around emotionally, you're going to be lost in the forest somewhere. Maybe not forever, but who wants to waste that kind of time? Or you could look at that bumper sticker, all of us who wander may not be lost, but nevertheless, it's important to have, you know, a plan.
Good. I think this was a great conversation. Annie, thank you so much. I want to highlight just a couple of things. We've talked about being really clear what you want when it comes to an exit. What are you moving away from? What are you moving towards? We talked about not retirement, but rewirement, like really thinking about it in a forward-looking, positive way. We talked about being clear what to expect and really not be under any illusion or like false concept of what's going to happen, but ask the questions and then ask again. We talked about fear and really exposing fear. And we talked about regret and really taking time to contemplate these important questions rather than just answer it because it's a checkbox that needs to be checked off. So I think there's probably more that we can zoom in on over time. Like all four of those are probably a conversation in and of themselves. But Annie, thank you so much for your time today for this conversation. Again, anyone that's listening that wants to reach out to Annie directly, they can find us on denverbusinesscoach.com on our leadership team. There's a direct link in bio as well. And then especially on the financial planning side as well. I love the distinction that you made of financial advisor, fiduciary, but then a financial coach as well, and like a different set of questions and perspective that a coach can introduce. And Steven, anything else that we want to add?
No, I think you summarized it great, Annie. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It was great to hear from your story and your perspective, and can't wait for the next conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, till next time, everyone. Thank you.